I believe that Dr. Judy Wood is perhaps the most significant voice on this, the 10th anniversary of 9/11. Her book, Where Did the Towers Go?, is mind-boggling in its implications. The hundreds of images throughout the book are surreal, even shocking. Yet in the face of the evidence that the WTC buildings were not brought down by either airplanes or a controlled demolition, Dr. Wood makes no attempt to point fingers at who or why the buildings came down. In fact, this interview reveals that it is a respect for the technology that likely did the catastrophic damage that propelled her to write this book, a book that has colossal implications. Let's go to Dr. Wood. Judy, thanks so much for being here. This book, Where Did the Towers Go?, seems to me to be the single most comprehensive look at what happened on the day of 9/11. And that's kind of loaded, and we'll get into that in a little bit. I mean, in there are so many surprises. I thought I had read a lot about this event, but page after page, I was shocked by the information you were presenting. And a very timely, just a little timely thing before we get in here was with having a week of news on Hurricane Irene, which was a Category 1?
By 2 miles an hour.
Oh, yeah, 2 miles an hour, dropping down to a tropical storm. A week's worth of hysterical coverage in the media. However, one of the little-known things I'm just going to toss out there right off the top was there was a hurricane, massive hurricane, much greater. What was it, a Category 3, I believe, sitting right off the coast of New York City on the day of 9/11. And I haven't talked to one person that even knew that was there. And in fact, you've been getting a lot of reports on that, as I understand.
Yes, there's a fellow who emailed me. He, as synchronicity would have it, he was reading my book and had just gotten to chapter 18. This is a college professor in Vermont who had heard all of these horrendous news reports about Hurricane Irene coming. So he turns to the start of chapter 18 and this big Hurricane Aaron picture. And he finished the book and then ordered 5 more.
Yes, I mean, I was shocked when I saw that. But you know what I was even shocked more by was what appeared to be cleansed weather forecasts that were going on just prior to the buildings going down. And here this massive hurricane sitting right off the coast, headed right into New York City. And they're saying, well, it's a lovely day here. And they even had little, as you show in the book, little red arrows pointing where there will be a thunderstorm a little later on in the day or a tornado kicking up. And yet they're ignoring this huge thing that should have been dead center of their coverage. And what shocked me, and I know you're not a conspiracy theorist, and I'm not asking you to go there, how in the world, why in the world would that not be right up front and center of the coverage that day, not just of the weather, but dominating all of the news? And that's just one of so many anomalous events and stories that lead to that kind of question. Let's just launch into it. We can start really going in the order of your book because it's so well laid out. Your evidence is really, it's pointing to something different than the 9/11 truth movement and the architects and various people that have stated that this was a thermite-based explosion, the building had been wired in advance and so forth. And what you're saying in this is essentially, is very different than that. Let's talk about why. Where would you like to start with it? I mean, we can get right into pancakes or whatever you like.
Well, I like to look at evidence because 9/11 was a psychological operation. It was a physical destruction and psychological destruction. Yes. They were both. And the psychological destruction planted seeds out there to divert people. You know, if they were not accepting the official story that went out on the media, there was a backup story being planted. And it gets people caught up into arguing about opinions and theories and speculations. Let's just look at the evidence, because evidence is unifying.
It is, and what you've been very, very careful to do here in the book and also in the media is you are not venturing to say who may have perpetrated this event, why they perpetrated it, or even how they perpetrated it, although you do put some very strong evidence down here as to what happened. You want to stick with the facts only and allow other people to begin putting their own dots together. Is that my understanding?
Well, also, you need to begin with the evidence to show what the crime was you want to charge somebody for. If you're going to say they did it, what is it?
Right. Right. What is it? Uh-huh.
And that recent Casey Anthony trial that was hyped in the media, they were determining all sorts of things. But the next day, a jury member said it so wonderfully. She said, well, if I don't know how the child died, how can I, put somebody on death row for it?
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
you have to know what the crime is before you charge somebody with it. And that's the first step in any investigation. So start with the evidence.
Well, let's first just give me a little list of your credentials, because you're a serious engineer in many modalities of engineering. Can you just tell us a little bit so we understand who you are?
Well, I have a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering, master's degree in engineering mechanics, which is like applied physics, and a PhD in materials engineering science with expertise in image analysis, optical methods, applied mechanics, and over 35 years of experience in this area.
Yeah, I just wanted to get that up front so people understand this is not a theory. You're a scientist through and through, and this book is absolutely amazing in what you've compiled. I have to tell you, when it came to the mathematical formulas, I kind of went to the next page and just got the gist of it. That's the only part I didn't hang with you on, but I understood the concept of what you were saying. Okay, so out of the chute, everyone knows what the official story is, and I think anyone listening to this has already dismissed that long ago. But what they probably have not dismissed is that this was a most people at this point are thinking that this was a controlled demolition, and there were explosives used, and many people have read or been exposed to the notion that thermite may have been involved. And let's start into a bit of the science. I know we have a lot to do in an hour here, but let's start into that.
A quick summary is that the buildings didn't burn up, nor did they slam to the ground, but they turned into dust in midair.
Mm-hmm.
How do I know that? Because if they collapsed to the ground, you'd have a pile of debris that would correspond to 210-story buildings. That didn't happen. Lower Manhattan would have been flooded due to a broken bathtub, the dike that holds out the Hudson River. Few people realize that the towers were built in the Hudson River. And the bedrock is 70 feet below the water table. So there's this dike they call the bathtub or slurry wall that holds out the Hudson River. If you crash down two 500,000-ton buildings onto the bathtub, it would have ruptured and flooded the subway tunnels, the PATH train tunnels. That didn't happen. As a matter of fact, when they took down the remains of Building 6, they used a cable to pull it down because they were afraid to use explosives. And this was a 6-story building. Mm-hmm. It was just this little clump left. And the other way I know that it wasn't that buildings turned to dust, just the simple way, is that if the buildings had collapsed to the ground, they'd make a thud, and the seismic signal that was recorded did not correspond to the size of the buildings. The seismic signal corresponded to a 16-story building or a 20-story building, not 110-story buildings.
Yes. And when you're talking about this, you call it dustification. You're looking at, I mean, just the real basics. You would expect at least for there to at least be, as you say, that pancake effect if there had actually been even a controlled demolition of the building. There was no pancake. There were no pancakes.
Right. You'd have a bumpity, 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 bump, and you should have a stack of stuff left over. Not only that, if you're driving this jackhammer, bumpity, bumpity, bump onto bedrock, the ground should be shaking.
Yes, absolutely.
And it wasn't. The ground actually, with that little signal, only shook for 8 seconds. It would take 9.5 seconds in a vacuum to drop a bowling ball off the roof and have it hit the pavement.
Yet, at the same time, the building itself came down in how many seconds?
I don't say it came down.
Well, it turned into dust, yeah.
So if you dustify, if you have a new phenomenon, you need a new word to describe it.
Yes.
It's unscientific to use the description of a known phenomenon to describe an unknown phenomenon. So I say dustification. Mm-hmm. We've never seen a building do this before, so it is a new thing. So if the building dustifies from the 20th story on up, and you're only dropping the lower, 20 stories, which is about the size of the rubble you see, which is about the size of the seismic signal you see, and so forth. And surrounding buildings didn't have any stab wounds, I call them, a beam going, stabbing into a building.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't have that above, like, the 20th floor.
Mm-hmm. And this is not to be confused even with pulverization, right?
Right.
Let's talk about it.
Pulverization is like grinding something up.
Mm-hmm.
You get a hammer and hit a rock against another rock. You get, big chunks, little chunks, in between sized chunks. You get a random size. You don't get nano-sized particles.
Yes. So that, because a lot of people say, well, it was pulverized. No, it wasn't pulverized. You're being very specific when you say this building was dustified or converted to dust rapidly.
Exactly, because it's a different process than what we've seen before. And it's not vaporization. Vaporization implies heat.
Yes.
And the building wasn't cooked.
And at the same time, you have recordings of people who were standing on the windowsills and who were calling in on 911 and saying they were so hot. They had started taking clothing off even. What was going on there? Let's take us through to that point of what you see in the building.
Well, when I used to swim a lot in the mornings when I was at Virginia Tech, and the fraternity party had joked around the night before and cranked up the thermostat. And when we got there, it was like 93 degrees.
Uh-huh.
They said we could swim at our own risk. And I started swimming. Oh, this is great because I hate getting in cold water. I got halfway out in the middle of the pool and I realized I was in trouble. I was overheating.
Mm-hmm.
So I rolled over on my back just to kind of quit making more heat. And somebody threw me a rope. And I remember wondering, is it that important to reach over there and get that rope?
Oh, your mind wasn't working.
Maybe I will, maybe I won't. And I remember also there's a time limit how long you can stay in the sauna and in the hot tub.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, if you're really hot, you just, don't function.
Right.
And these recordings that we heard, like of the Melissa Doy, it's, I'm really hot, I'm really burning up, I can't breathe. And you never heard her choking the entire time. At first I thought it was a fake call, but then I realized, no, there's something else going on here. For somebody the conversation they aired for us is like 5 minutes. And someone cannot survive in that kind of heat that she was describing for 5 minutes. So apparently she was sensing heat.
Yes, let's talk about that. And so what happened with another thing besides the fact that these buildings turn to dust. So we can go into all the science, but really I would encourage people to get a copy of the book. It explains all the science right through from the very beginning. When the buildings were standing, you take people through this very nicely. We don't have to get into all of the science and equations here on that. Let's just say these buildings turned to dust.
Yeah, I think you were kind of alluding to the
heat,
referred to as the jumpers.
Yes, the jumpers and the heat that you said this building did not burn. Yet they kept saying, "I'm so hot."
Right, and then we have these people hanging from the outside of the 105th floor. That's 5 floors from the top, taking off their clothes, or with their clothes already off. Clothes protect you from high heat. They protect you from fire. And also, if you did take your clothes off, why hang from the 105th floor by hand and a foot to take your clothes off?
Yeah. So what was going on there? Why were they so hot? If you're saying there was no fire, it wasn't about fire.
Well, I wasn't there, so I don't know, but I can say it's consistent with something like an energy field. You think of microwaves used to control crowds.
Mm-hmm.
They make the crowds run and make the crowds want to just, get away from it, where it's because it's just very painful.
Mm-hmm.
And so what Melissa Doy was describing was intense pain.